My mother, does anybody remember that? I see some heads shaking. Remember, this was a book that I loved to read to our children when they were little. You know, it's one of the many little child books. You're going to get a chance to read a lot of them in the years ahead. Julie's sitting over there. She's expecting a little baby girl come October, and Mazel Tov on that. This is one of the ones hopefully you'll be reading to them. Are You My Mother by somebody named P.D. Eastman. Now, for those of you who either, you've never read this book, so, you know, this is like, what is this all about? Actually, it's a story about a mother bird here who has left an egg in a nest in a tree and has flown away. Actually, it says, "I must get something for my baby bird to eat," she said. And so she went off to find it and left the egg there. See, so that's the way it starts. And the egg is sitting in this nest all by itself. And guess what happens while mom is gone? Well, little baby bird is born, little guy, I guess. He says, "Where is my mother?" He's coming out and he says, "I'm looking for mom. I don't see her anywhere here." He, said the little boy, said, I'll go and look for her." That sounds like trouble right there, right? You know, it's probably not but this is, I got to give sometimes children reveal their personalities early on. And so this little bird was pretty aggressive. He's going to go out and look around. And then, of course, he's not really flying yet, so he's kind of walking around. And as you can see, he's going in every different direction, looking around. Where is his mother? And he keeps asking different animals, "Are you my mother? Are you my mother?" Here's an example of one. He's on top of his dog, and obviously he doesn't look anything at all like the dog. You might think that he looked for, but he doesn't know what his mother looked like. He'd never seen her. And so he's asking this dog, "Are you my mother?" Too quiet. He says, "What is that up there?" You know. Well, you see. And, of course, as the story goes on, he checks out a whole bunch of animals and ends up, mother finally finds him, brings him back to the nest, and so on, and everything ends happily ever after. So this book actually has relevance, believe it or not, for our study this morning, because, you see, coming off of this thought, and I thought about this when I was preparing the message for this morning, actually we can take this question and just tweak it a little bit to look like this: "Are you my brother?" And of course the story wasn't written by somebody named Eastman. The story was actually written by Rabbi Saul of Tarsus. And keep that in mind as we approach today's scripture. Are you my brother? Okay, so we're in 1 Corinthians, many of you know, and we are just still at the very early stages of 1 Corinthians. There's a whole lot of fascinating text to come. I'm excited about studying through them, and I hope you are too. If you haven't already, read through the book of 1 Corinthians, sometime would be, the next few weeks would be a good time to get into that. And as you know, we've covered the first 4 chapters already, during which point Paul, who has written this letter to the congregation in Corinth, remember he wrote it from Ephesus, Paul did after this, starting for the congregation in Corinth, and I'll mention a couple things about that later, but he addresses the question of division, factions, people who are causing division rather than working together as a team. You know, every time you think about a team, the point is to work together. And if you don't work together, the team probably is not going to win too many games. In the next 2 chapters, 5 and 6, Paul switches from the question of division and factions to the question of holy living, because there's another one of many problems that are addressed in this book of 1 Corinthians. And we're in this section where Paul is addressing the question of holy living. And, it's a subject, to be honest with you, I have trouble I have trouble thinking about that issue in the world that we live in. Because everywhere I go and everything I see and everything that's happening around me, everything I hear about, is entirely unrelated, unfortunately, to godly living, to holy living. I mean, the world all around us, do you really, is anybody hear much of that except when you come here or you open up your scriptures? I don't see much of it. And it's really hard to keep that concept about holy living and a holy God in mind in the world you live in. Now, some of us are blessed to be able to work at a place where people really are concerned with such issues. When I was attending Talbot Seminary, boy, I felt like I had somebody pinch me here, because everybody, certainly the professors and the students, that was on their mind were God-related things. I walked into a class, I'll never forget, my first class at Talbot, and the professor introduced himself, said a few words, and immediately he prayed. And I thought, whoa, this is not like any of my classes back in college that I went to. And I thought to myself, I must have died and gone to heaven here, because this is the way it must be. Anyway, I was so blessed by that. But holy living is not something that is, as soon as you walk through those doors, it might leave your mind. Didn't leave Paul's mind. Okay, so we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and just to briefly, and I have to do this quickly because Chris will be all over me if I don't do it quickly, you have to review a little bit. First, because you can't remember for a week, and some of us can't remember for what we had for breakfast this morning, can we? What did you have for breakfast, right? Think about that. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, we read and studied in weeks past. It is actually reported, this is the setting, it's actually reported there is immorality among you. And by the way, the word you, in the entire, everything we're going to read here, the word you can be thought of as y'all. Okay, it's a plural you. He's not talking to just the person who is guilty of the issue. He's talking to the entire congregation. Actually reported everything, that there is immorality, sexual immorality among you, that's the word porneus, among you, and immorality of such a kind as does not exist among even the Gentiles, the pagans, that someone has his father's wife. And we talked about that. It's likely it's not actually the biological mother of this man, but more likely a stepmom, perhaps, who has either much younger than her original mom, than her father's original mother, and we don't hear much about her later, so we don't think that she was part of the congregation. But anyway, this is a man who is having sexual relations with his father's stepwife. And you have become not just upset at it and disappointed that you fell into this, but you've actually become arrogant. You know anybody else who's, well, I better not go there. Okay, so you have become arrogant and have not mourned instead, so that the one who had done this deed would be, if you had mourned, would be removed from your midst. If you had realized what the sin is, you all, as a congregation, would not have allowed this. Can you imagine, being arrogant about something that's going on? When this blatant sin, which is even repugnant to the pagans in the community of Corinth, known for their sexual immorality, this is going on, and you're arrogant instead about it. You boast about it, and he says you're boasting probably because of their liberty in Messiah. We hear that today, of freedom in Christ, right? You hear that? Well, I got news for you. He didn't give his life so that you could continue in sin. He gave his life that you might be freed from sin, to live righteously, holy. Don't boast about this. Do you not know that even a little bit of boasting, this kind of sin that's going on in your midst, it's contagious, it spreads. Others will see it and naturally gravitate to the lowest level. Wherever the worst example is, that seems to be the ones that people follow. I certainly see that today. It seems to me people make an effort to try to see if they can outdo the other one by sinning more, by being less holy. What a shame. We don't hold up examples of holy living in our lives. You don't hear about that. I don't have a magazine. Anybody have a magazine? Maybe you got a Biola magazine. They try to bring these out. But most of the things out there, I mean, my goodness. The things that interest our culture are terrible. Ungodly, beyond belief. Clean out the old leaven, he says in verse 7, so that you may be a new lump. Get rid of the sin that's going on in your congregation. Messiah, our Passover, the one who has been sacrificed, the one who gave his life. You remember this, congregation? Paul's writing. Remember that. Our Messiah has been sacrificed. He's given up his life to cleanse you. Don't go back to a sinful way of life. So we pick up our message this morning, beginning in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 at verse 9, as we will complete chapter 5 this morning. And he says, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. And this is an interesting comment, by the way. I love these little droppings that come out, because when you look at it, what letter? We don't have that letter. Paul wrote a letter previous to the one we call 1 Corinthians. Lost to history. I don't know about you, but I always wonder, how many other letters have been lost? I'll bet you the apostles, many of whom we have no letters of, most of whom, wrote many things. We have writings from Matthew and John and Peter and a few others, but we really don't have, these guys, they probably wrote a lot. Boy, I wish we had some of those. That'd be fascinating. But this is what we have. God has provided for them, and he says it's sufficient. I wrote you in my letter. You should have known, he says, by my previous letter. By the way, he wrote, we think that what we call 1 Corinthians, written in about the year 54. So we're about, 30 years, 20 years after the ascension here. And he's written a letter. He wrote this probably in late 50, let's see, the congregation was founded in 51 to 52 on his second missionary journey, and now he's writing about 2 to 3 years after that, the founding. He's now on his next missionary journey, and he's writing from Ephesus, and he says, I wrote you in that letter not to associate with immoral people. Who's he talking about? Well, you see, they must have misunderstood, because he's about to clarify. Who are the immoral people he's talking about? He says, I need to clarify this for you, because it's quite obvious you're not getting it. When I said not to associate with immoral people, I did not at all mean the immoral people of the world around you. I wasn't talking about them. I wasn't talking about the world around you. I wasn't talking about the covetous and the swindlers or the idolaters that live all around you, that are not part of your congregation. I wasn't talking about them, because if I was to say you shouldn't hang around with them, you shouldn't associate with them, well, you'd have to leave the entire earth. There'd be no place to go, unless you came to Ben David. Don't associate with them. So he's got to clarify. I wasn't talking, when I said don't associate with immoral people, I wasn't talking about the world, because everybody, it's all over, it's all around you. No. Actually, I wrote you, not, and what I meant for you to understand is I wrote you not to associate with any so-called brother. This is a phrase that appears nowhere else in Scripture. And Paul says, a so-called brother. Anybody got any so-called brothers? You think maybe we've met somebody who says they're a brother, and maybe he isn't. There was a man named Augustine, probably you've heard of him. He was the bishop of Hippo. And he ministered to a place called Hippo. This is a city. I want to show you where that is, because you know what? When things like this come up, I want to know where that is. You might say, well, it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't matter to you, but it matters to me. And maybe some of you out there. Okay, so here we go. You haven't seen a map in a while, right? Here's a map of the Mediterranean area, North Africa, and you can see one of the states that's outlined there. You see where Israel is, Egypt, and Libya, and off on the north, kind of western section of Africa is a place called Algeria. And if you look carefully on the north, on the northern coast, on the eastern edge of Algeria, that is where the ancient city of Hippo was. It's now under a different name, but that's where it is. There is a city there today. And that's where Augustine did his ministry, a lot of it. And that's where he writes from. Now, Augustine noticed a couple of things about so-called brothers. You see, he recognized that we have something that we call the church, the congregation, the Kehillah, if you want to be Hebraic about it. And in the early days, most of the congregants were Jewish, so it would be appropriate to call it. But here at Corinth, probably not so much. And he wrote something he called the visible church. That's the people who look like they're believers. The people who you see. In those days, if you were a believer, you didn't miss going to church. Why was that? Because you didn't necessarily have a copy of the scriptures under your arm, walking around, or in your pocket on a little smartphone. No, you didn't have that. The only place you could go to hear it probably was at a congregation, a church. They didn't want to miss. And there weren't too many of them. It's kind of like Messianic congregations. You know? You find a good one, you don't want to miss it, do you? Do you? Anybody out there want? You shouldn't want to miss it. We don't have services every 10 minutes, you know? You only get to come. But then he also recognized that there is really those people who are part of what you looks like, the Kehillah, are not necessarily all believers. Ron was talking about that a few moments ago. All that come to the congregation, not here, but may not be true believers. In those days, you could tell who were a believer because you would go they were meeting probably by then, already had moved the meeting date to Sunday. And so there were these two groups. The people who looked like they were believers, and then the subset of those who really were. And there was nobody who probably was a believer who didn't show up. But John wrote about this very thing hundreds of years before, over 300 years before. He wrote in 1 John about people who were not believers. He said in chapter 2, verse 19, they went out from us, but they did not really belong to us. You see, if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us. But their going showed that none of them belonged to us. They didn't just change churches. There weren't other churches to change to. When they left and stopped coming, we knew that they were not of us. Okay, so he says, I wrote to you not to associate with somebody who is just a so-called brother. If that person is immoral, that's the group I was talking about. I wasn't talking about the immoral of the world. I was talking about the ones who were in your congregation who were immoral. And if this would work, there we go. He has five things he tells you about these people. Some of them. One area is those who are sexually immoral, and don't associate. By the way, while I'm on the subject of people not to associate with, Paul says I'm taking it. Don't associate with those who are covetous. Covetous is a word that we don't use very much, but think of it as somebody who is greedy, somebody who wants what somebody else has and will pretty much do anything to get it. So stay away from those who are the sexually immoral, those who are greedy, those who are idolatrous, an idolater. Now, the Greek word that's translated idolater actually can be thought of in different ways. It can mean somebody who serves a false god or worships a false god, or somebody who is, in modern parlance, a syncretist. And what is syncretism? Syncretism is when you take things that are disparate and you blend them together, you fuse them together. For example, you have true religion, true following of God, and you put it together with things of the world that are not valid. And you try to integrate them and say, you know what, we're going to take a little bit of what's going on outside our door and put it together with what we're doing inside our door, and we'll make that more appealing to everybody because that's what they're used to seeing, and so we'll do that. And people will feel more at home. That's called syncretism. It's actually a form of idolatry because it's bringing immorality and secularism into what is supposed to be a holy congregation. He says, stay away from them. Stay away from those who are a reviler. A reviler is a word that actually is better, I think, better, NAS use the word, it's really a slanderer. Somebody who has an acid tongue, who defames and actually gets involved with character assassination, usually behind the back of the person that they're talking about. And I don't know if you've come across such a person. I see some heads shaking. I'm afraid all too many, huh? People who are slanderers, and they're sitting in churches, in congregations, and behind the backs of others, they're saying very negative things. See, these people have forgotten who they are and where they came from. These are people who put issues ahead of people. Yeshua died while we were yet sinners. He gave his life for us. How then shall we be so judgmental as to tear apart another brother or sister for something that we don't approve of? Do we lack such grace? Do we forget what has been done for us, that we can't manifest even a shred of that for others? Can we not see above an issue and look to the person and the humanity that's needed there and rise to that? Stay away from such people. Nobody here is like that. But if we're not careful, we can descend into that. Includes the word, he goes on, Paul says, stay away from the immoral, the covetous, the idolater, the reviler, and the drunkard. Now, in the days when Paul was writing these letters, it was undoubtedly alcohol related. That's what the word means. They overdid firewater. You know? Some of us know people who are addicted to that. Frankly, it was confession time. I lost a brother-in-law because he got consumed and so attached to alcohol. It didn't just ruin his marriage. It took his life in the end. I've watched it happen. And you can be drunk today in other ways. You can be attached and addicted to many other things these days. I put a list up there, and some of them you might think about here. You can be addicted to drugs. That's pretty bad, and it can take you down. There are entry-level drugs and so on. But there are other things that people are addicted to in our modern society. And I put up the words video games and the internet and texting and smartphones. I added that to the list because, as I thought about addictions, I realized we have, a lot of us are, with the best of intentions, we can't separate from some of these devices. I mean, I see some smiles, and I'm glad you're smiling. It's good. But there may be some more truth than you want to admit to some of these. You see, I did some research on the smartphone thing because I heard a number that I was absolutely astonishing to me, and I checked into that. Do you know that 70% of the people who own smartphones are almost never more than 5 feet from their phone? Think about that. Now, my wife is not one of them because I call her and she never answers her phone, it seems like. But I'm just saying that I didn't do that statistic, but I did look up and I found some other things that you might find interesting, and we're going to just mention a few of them here. Where smartphones are used. Now, a lot of us have smartphones. Some of us have dumb phones. All right, Chris, fine. So you don't have a smartphone. Yeah, I know. He's proud of the fact he has a dumb phone. I'm not talking about him. But those of us who are a little further advanced, where are smartphones used? This 2013 Mobile Consumer Habits Study found some interesting results I want to share with you. Do you know 55% of people who have smartphones use them while driving? Yes. California has a law against that, by the way, if you didn't know. Against a hand, you have to have you can use your smartphone while you're driving. It just has to be hands-free. I found out the hard way that they enforce that. You were with me. And we won't talk about that. 55% while driving. How about this one? 35% use them in a movie theater. We just went and saw a movie the other night, and you can't miss this. Please turn off your cell. Be nice to those around you. Make sure your phones are off during the movie to disturb. There it is, over 35% in a movie. 35% say in a movie. 33% use it on a dinner date. What are you there for? Have you ever walked in a restaurant and seen a couple of people sitting at a table and they're both on their phones? Oh yeah. I mean, it's hilarious. I wish I'd take a picture of that, but I can't get my phone out fast enough. 32% use them at a school function for their children. When they go to, they're sitting there at a school function of any kind, and they're texting or looking at video, whatever. They're checking the web, or I don't know what they're doing. That's almost a third. How about this one? 12% of the people use smartphones in the shower. I don't know what kind of smartphone they have. Probably one that doesn't work pretty soon, because I know the iPhone doesn't like water. 12% use them in the shower. 9% have been on their cell phones while they're making love. Really? Now you notice there's a gap here. This one hurts. Are you ready? 19% use their cell phones in a place of worship. They're either receiving or texting or thinking, checking something, their email, their whatever. 19%. So I was going to ask Herman if he could disconnect the internet for us during the service. Yeah, but he wanted it for himself. So. Anyway, you talk about an addiction, I need say no more. But in addition to being captured by alcohol, He says to avoid those who are, and the word is translated is here, swindlers. Swindler, really, we all know what a swindler is, right? This is the guy with the black trench coat on, who opens up the coat and you see a bunch of Rolexes hanging from his thing, and how about one of these, I'll sell it for you only $3 for a brand new Rolex. And you think to yourself, really? See, a swindler comes in other denominations here. He can be an extortioner or a modern-day scammer, a con artist, or somebody who's just basically out to make a buck, and they will do anything for it. And I think we've all been exposed to those. This seems to be, they didn't have a monopoly on it back in the first century here. We still have such people. And perhaps some of you have been bitten by some of these. There are constant methods. Get these. I get an email from Nigeria that says, $32 million is ready to be transferred to your account. All you got to do is fill in this form. And I just, it's really an attempt. They're not a very good one either, because their English is usually bad, and or you get one from the bank that is misspelled. He's got misspellings in it, and it says you have to check your account that's been suspended or will be suspended. Please fill out this thing. Don't do those. Don't do those. Don't go there. They're scamming. They're swindling. They're trying to get something from you, and they will. Unfortunately, too many people fall for that. Paul says, avoid these kind of people. Don't even eat with such a one. And these are part of your congregation. That doesn't mean, we don't have any of those here at Ben David, so that's not an excuse to not be at the Oneg. I just want to point out. It says not even to eat with such a one. Because these kind of people are not living holy lives. So these are just examples, and I'm sure Paul could have gone on and listed many others as examples, but he listed these. And then he goes on, Paul says, now you remember I'm trying to correct your misunderstanding of what I wrote to you before, but so you have to judge within you who fall in this category, but I'm not judging outsiders, and neither should you. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? That's not my calling. I don't have any prerogative, really, to start defining outsiders who are not believers. I'm not asking you even to judge them. I don't have any desire to do that, nor any capability to do that. But do you not judge those who are within your congregation? What are you guys doing? Are you letting this sinful attitude pervade your congregation? Do you realize what you are doing as far as your ministry to those outside? If they look at you as a congregation, they see this is the kind of stuff that goes on all the time in the so-called holy congregations, and they're inviting you to come to faith and join their community, and they're filled with these kind of activities going on. Sorry. Thanks, but no thanks. I don't need any of that. Your witness will be completely undermined if you allow this kind of thing to happen. Paul is calling on the entire congregation at Corinth. And that call comes to you and me today, where we are, right where we are. When we see things that are unholy and not right, and I have to take a moment here to point out, what are you supposed to do with that when you see it? Come and complain to Doug. No, that's not the right way. Because Paul didn't say talk to your elders. He didn't say go find a one or two and let them, tell them, oh, I saw so-and-so doing this. And then, no. This is addressed to the entire congregation. All of you are called. If you see something that you know is wrong, with love and grace, knowing that the brother or sister who is involved with this needs to change, don't go and hit him over the head with your Bible. Shame on you, get out of here. The goal is to correct them. But if they are unwilling and unrepentant, then there are other things you to do. But the first thing to do is to go speak with them in love, privately. Because our goal is not to bring people down. Our goal is to raise people up. We don't want to discourage people and call them out of all we want to get them on the right road. We don't want to push them out of our congregation. We want to attract them in. We want them to feel the love of the Lord that they first felt maybe when they thought they were coming to faith. You're supposed to be salt and light. Matthew, the Lord spoke in the Sermon on the Mount. But if you've lost your saltiness, if you are involved in these things yourself, how then are you going to reach? What happens to that saltiness? It's worthless, ready to be just trampled underfoot, put back on the road. It's worthless salt. You see, you can't take the splinter out of somebody else's eye while you have a log in your own. So first, take the log out of your own, and then go take the splinter out. It doesn't say you shouldn't. It just says first, clean your own act up. God is calling you to holiness. Paul is calling the entire congregation. And the last sentence in 1 Corinthians 5 says this: but those who are outside, that's not your immediate problem. Not that there isn't a problem there. Yes, there's a huge problem there. But if you go tell somebody who is not a believer that he's sinning, chances are that's not going to come across very well. It's not going to change anything. All they'll do is probably discard your relationship with them. Speaking of relationships, what Paul is saying here, put holiness above relationship. If you're concerned that, as I think perhaps some of the Corinthians were, we don't know this person who was guilty of this, be a man being with his father's wife. Why didn't they say anything? Maybe he was the leader of the congregation. Or maybe they were meeting at his house. He had a great upstairs, He didn't have another place to meet, so better be careful. He's what they call a patron at that time, somebody who was maybe a wealthy person, maybe had influence. You can't go up to a person like that, can you? Just kind of overlook that one, right? No, you can't. You shouldn't. You're called specifically not to. Those who are outside, God will judge them. In this case, remove the wicked man from among yourselves. That's the way he ends this chapter here. It's not, Paul didn't write in chapters. Remove the wicked man. The information was well known. Now I want to extend it a little bit further. I'm going to extend this further, but let me ask this question. In the days of when Paul wrote this letter to the congregation, where did they go? Where would a person go if they were removed from the congregation in Corinth? He didn't have any other place to go. You put somebody out of a congregation in Corinth, you're done. You don't have another congregation down the street to go to. That was disfellowshipping. Today, if you put somebody out of your congregation, where do they go? Next door. Thank you. Down the street, next door, whatever. You see, the punishment that Paul suggested for a congregation in those days doesn't work so well today. We ought to be aware of that. Putting somebody who is involved with sin and unrepentant out today, all they'll do is shake the dust off their feet and walk to the next place. And the next place will receive them with open arms. Because why? Nobody checks on anybody. pretty much. Some congregations will be careful about those things, especially when it comes to teachers in their Shabbat school or whatever the school. They will do a background check on people they're putting in there just to see if this person has anything that they should know about that hasn't been revealed. We actually found out about something like that some time ago. And when we did, we addressed it. Because that's what the Scripture calls us to do. Don't turn away from sin. Address it with the goal of restoration. But if it's unrepentant, you have to take some action. There may be better ways. In fact, there's an interesting book, I wish I had the time to read it, in which a pastor has come up with creative ways for church discipline, if I'll use that phrase, creative ways. And you think, really? How creative is there to, left foot of fellowship? Is that, I mean, what do you do with somebody who is, how do you be creative about that? And I thought it was some interesting ideas that I did hear about. For example, they suspended someone from their membership so that they were not able to participate in certain things of the congregation. But they went further. They had them do penance. If they wanted to stay, they asked them to begin to do some things in their congregation, to serve in ways they hadn't served before. That way they could kind of keep an eye on the person and keep connected with that person and keep them in some ways part of their congregation and in some ways restrict them. And if they were serious about repenting from what, then it'd be obvious. The goal again, and I love this, the goal was restoration. The goal was discipline, to disciple, to teach. Now, when some go down the street when they're asked to leave a congregation, not everybody goes down the street. You see, some just want to be left alone. Just get out of my life. I don't want to see you anymore. And you realize when that's happened, you've lost them unless you push and remain in their lives. And your goal is not to tear them down and beat them up, but to help them see the error of their ways. Now, some don't go down the street. Some want to be left alone. Some want to go to a lawyer. It's happened. It's actually a warning for all congregations. We really need to get our bylaws and things updated. I'm looking at Chris. He's been telling me that for how many years, Chris? You forgot. Even you forgot. We need to do that. When you have people become members of the congregations, we jokingly say, if you come once, you're a visitor, you come twice, you're a member, right? But that's not really true. Membership involves much more than that and should. And a congregation needs to protect itself because, there have been places that have been put out of business by our wonderful legal system. We have the best legal system money can buy. Yes, sir. And we have to be careful. Now, I want to extend it still further. He said, remove the wicked man from among yourselves. What if there's a group? What if there's an entire church that you've been attending, that you're aware of it, that's really gone off doctrinally and properly termed heretical? What if they're doing things that are inconsistent at best with the Scripture, and in fact, they're hurtful to the gospel? I couldn't help but think about this. Recently in the news, there's a part of the Presbyterian Church called the PCUSA. They've they're struggling. They've been back and forth on this. But there's this group amongst them that are pro-Palestinian. Now, I don't mind being for something, but in the process, they are undermining everything we are trying to do in terms of bringing the gospel to the Jewish people. They're anti-Israel. They have this campaign they call BDS, which stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanctions. Why? Because Israel is such an ogre, accusing them of being an apartheid state. And we showed the video, as you saw, Dennis Prager a few weeks ago. See, there are groups of people that form churches that go in bad directions. Don't be a part of those. It may be an opportunity for you to stand up. You go to, they have another meeting, by the way, coming up. This whole PCUSA, they have their General Assembly meeting in June. I think it's Detroit. So if you're in the area, you might stop in and speak and raise your hand and come to the podium and explain why this kind of approach is ungodly. There are many others, obviously. What about whole churches? I think you're to be careful about associating with those and supporting them. Just recently, we had a gentleman who was attending a congregation, a church not far from here. Their doctrine was so bad that this person actually tried to speak with the pastor about it. The pastor wouldn't listen. And the person kept going. I don't know if they were supporting it financially or what, but they kept going. They tried to get an audience with the pastor, couldn't get it. Eventually, they left. Because if you can't get people to turn around, then you have to abandon. That's what was going on in Corinth. Paul said, enough is enough. Put this person out. But you and I have to be diligent to ask this question. Are you my brother? And when we say that, we have to know what we're talking about. And we have to know the other person, or my sister. I didn't mean just men here, but women as well. Are you my sister in the Lord? Really? Get to know people here. And if you find things that are not what they should be, try to help. Don't tell me or Jerry about them. Jim, just don't run with those. Try to help. That's what Paul's encouragement was. If it gets unrepented, you have to put the person out. You have to take steeper steps. But the goal is always restoration. And we have to be diligent about it. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for preserving your word, that we might learn from it, Lord, that we might get our own wake-up calls to be diligent about serving you in holiness and helping our brothers and sisters to do the same. Lord, may we be worthy of speaking to others. May we take holiness seriously, and seriously enough, Lord, that it changes our lives. Maybe there are things that we need to change first. And may we be open to correction from others around us. And may we bring corrections to others, but always doing it in love. And Father, I thank you for that reminder to each and every one of us here this morning. We say we love you, but do we really? Are we willing to make our brother or sister, treat them as more important than ourselves, and extend grace? Because if we're not a congregation of grace, we've lost our way. Help us, Lord. Help us to be good examples, that others would look to us and say, yes, you truly are a brother or a sister. And we give you all the praise and the glory and the thanksgiving in the name of the greatest example of all, Messiah Yeshua. Amen.